So very briefly, steps for solving just a linear equation, just a normal equation. So write it down if you need to write it down. Don't worry about it if you don't need to write it down. Solving linear equations. So these, when I refer to linear equations, I'm not talking about square roots or absolute values or quadratics. I'm just talking about the most complicated thing you have in there is like a 5x or something. So the first thing you want to do is simplify both sides of the equation. So when you are combining like terms, or you distribute and then combine like terms, just make sure you're not combining like terms across the equal sign. So you're simplifying everything on the left side and then simplifying everything on the right side. The next thing, and there are different orders in which to do this, but I find this the easiest way to do it, is take away the smallest variable from both sides. So for example, if I have a 5x plus 2 and a 3x minus 8, I'm going to take the 3x away because that helps me avoid having to deal with negative numbers. So that's what I mean by that. If I go from there, after that, I am going to add or subtract, depending on what my original problem is. So add or subtract to get the constants on the opposite side of the variable. So from my step up here, I've got 2x plus 2 equals negative 8. Since I am adding that constant of 2, I'm going to subtract it. So I do the opposite of what it is. So I have x equals negative 10. Then my last step is multiply or divide. Thank you. To get the variable alone. And that just means you do the opposite of what's being done. If you're multiplying, like the 2x equals 10, or negative 10, you're going to divide by 2. So you have x equals negative 5. If you were dividing, in that last step, you would multiply to get rid of that and get x alone. Those steps are going to vary depending on what type of equation you have. You can't solve a quadratic equation in that same way. But if you think about some of the things that we know, some of the inverse operations or undoing operations, how do you undo addition? Subtraction. How do you, guys, shush. How do you, so those go back and forth. If you're subtracting, you undo it with addition. If you're adding, you undo it with subtraction. If you are multiplying, you divide. And back and forth there. Good question. If you have x squared, how do you undo that one? Square root. If you square root something, you need to watch out for what? Plus or minus. So the thing about that is if I have x squared equals 36, and I square root to undo that x squared, x can equal plus or minus 6. So just watch out for that when you take the square root.
When you're trying to square root off something,
Square.
so.
Yep, so that goes both ways as well. The only thing you have to be careful about is when you do square both things, and we'll do a problem like that, you have to square the entire thing, so you have to be careful about when you do it. Other things, we'll talk about the absolute value in just a moment, because that one's a tricky one. But those are some of those undoing operations that it's important to know. Relatively comfortable with most of those problems, but I am going to do number 5 with you because this is one of the common mistakes I see. So I have the square root of x minus 5 equals 2. What do I need to do? I need to get rid of that square root sign. So, couple things. I cannot add 5 to get rid of it because it is stuck under that square root sign. I can't get it out until I get rid of that square root sign. So I'm going to square both sides. So I'm just writing this step again. So x minus 5 squared equals 2 squared. The square root sign and the square are opposite or inverse operations. So what I'm left with on this side of the equation is what? X minus 5. Very common mistake there that people make is they want to write that as x minus 25. Don't do that. You're squaring to get rid of that square root sign. On the other side, I have 4, and then it's just as simple as adding 5 to both sides. Questions on number 5? So that's one of the more basic ones. So if you take a look at number 3 on the rewriting section, one of the most common mistakes that you're going to see, or that I'm going to see, is x minus 3 squared becoming x squared minus 9. I haven't seen as much of that error lately, but why is that one not okay?
Because there's no...
Because you have to have a middle term. When you multiply this out, this is x minus 3 times x minus 3, which is x squared minus 3x minus 3x plus 9. So this we're going to rewrite because we have to get that out. If we tried to square root to undo that square, then we'd have the negative 2x plus 6 stuck under the square root sign, and that doesn't help us simplify this at all. So we're going to write this. We have our negative 2x plus 6 on our left side of the equation. That's going to stay the same. And then we're going to rewrite the other side as x squared minus 6x plus 9. And I'm going to erase this part so it doesn't get super duper confusing. So now I have a quadratic equaling a linear. I need to get everything over to the same side to solve that. So what do I do? Minus 6. And what else? Add 2x. Because I have to get this all equaling 0 in order to solve this quadratic. Questions on that? What two methods do I have of solving this quadratic? Quadratic formula and factoring. So, what method would you prefer to use? Not if you want full credit. Factoring or quadratic formula?
Factor.
Alright, let's factor it. So, this one, my a equals 1, so I don't really need to do the whole box and diamond if I don't want to. I've got 3x squared on the top, negative 4x on the bottom. So 3 only has two factors, 3 and 1. So 3x and 1x, and what do I need to add to both of those? Negative. Because I have to add together to give me negative numbers. Alright guys, I think it's cute that you all think you can move whenever you want to, but Ethan and, I almost called you Jake, I'm sorry. Will go back to your seats. Okay, so, and I forgot to push pause on that, so that's all on the video. Alright, so x minus 3 times x minus 1. And then I use the zero product property to solve what makes this 0 and what makes this 0. So x equals 3 and 1. So those are my two answers on number 3. And we're just solving equations, so no need to solve for y. There are no y's to start with. Keep that in mind as we're going through these different types of problems. If you're solving a system, you should have x and y answers. If you're just solving an equation, you should only have your x answers. So, if absolute value is the distance from 0, sorry. So, if the absolute value of x equals 6, you guys can't see that. There we go. Then I have two possibilities for what x is. So x can equal what? X can equal 6 or x can equal negative 6. Because either one of those, if I put it in those absolute value brackets, will give me a positive 6 to get out of it. So this method that we're talking about that's referred to on your worksheet is called looking inside, because you're looking at what's inside those brackets, the absolute value brackets. So basically, whatever this is inside those brackets, what does that have to equal? 12 or negative 12. So this is where I take what's in here once I get the absolute value part alone and I split it. So I'm going to have the 3x plus 6 equals 12 and 3x plus 6 equals negative 12. Because whatever is in here, if it equals 12, it's going to come out as 12, and if it comes out as negative 12, it's going to come out as a positive 12. So then I solve both separately. So 3x equals 6, 3x equals negative 18. So x equals 2, and x equals negative 6. So those are my two possibilities for x that will work in that absolute value problem. Remember, is you're not going to split into those two parts of your question until your absolute value is alone on one side. So if I have 2 times the absolute value of 3x plus 6 plus 5 equals, that was a bad example. Give me a second. So that equals 29. I have to use a combination of the methods that we were doing the first time, so those undoing processes, and then I'm going to do the looking inside method. So what do I need to get rid of first? The plus 5. I'm going to get rid of that. And this is where you can kind of think of the order of operations backwards. So my last step is usually adding and subtracting in the order of operations. So when I'm trying to get something alone, when I'm trying to kind of unwrap a problem, the adding and subtracting is the first thing I'm going to get rid of. So minus 5 from both sides. So I have 2 times the absolute value of 3x plus 6 equals 24. What's my next step going to be? Getting rid of the 2, and how do I do that? I divide by 2. So something that's very important to understand, because a lot of people make this mistake, you cannot treat absolute value exactly like you would treat parentheses, meaning you cannot distribute this 2 into your absolute value. Don't do that. So you want to get rid of it by dividing by it. So we have the absolute value of 3x plus 6, I'm going to make that a little bit longer so it doesn't look like a 1, equals 12. And that's where you split it up like we did in the previous problem. So you split it off into 3x plus 6 equals 12, and 3x plus 6 equals negative 12. Questions on that? And then I'll let you solve there on your own. I am going to eventually do what get rid of that square root? Square. I don't want to do that until I have the square root sign alone. So what do I need to get rid of? The 9. Get rid of the 9 first. So I have 2 times the square root of 2x minus 4 equals 4. Then what? Divide by the 2. Square root 2x minus 4 equals 2. Now what do I do? Square both sides. So I have 2x minus 4 equals 4. And from there, you just solve it like a normal equation. Questions on that? So, when I have a problem like this, I have some fractions in there, I have some x's in there, I have some complicated things happening. The first thing that I want to do is get rid of my denominator. That's going to make it easier to deal with. How do I get rid of that? What's one way? Multiplying by what? So I have 2 different denominators, so I can multiply by 2 and then multiply by 3 to get rid of all of them, or I can multiply everything by what? 6. So this gets a little complicated when we do this. So give me a second. So if I multiply everything by 6, oops, you can't.
If the denominators are the same,
It has to be the same denominator on everything. Like if it was over 2, everything would have to be over 2, including like this one. So here's how I'm going to simplify this. What is 6 divided by 2? 3. So I have 3 times 3x plus 6 plus 6 times 4x. And then what's 6 divided by 3? 2. So I'm going to have 2 times 10x plus 4. So that's the undoing operation of getting rid of that division to get us out of the fraction form. And then I just distribute everything.
you theoretically multiply it by like any number.
Any number that's divisible by both 2 and 3. I mean, you could have done anything, but it wouldn't have necessarily helped you.
On the worksheet, both denominators are the same. Do you still do the same thing, even though the denominators are the same on both sides?
I'll come back to that one.
Yeah, can we also on the worksheet?
Huh?
Can we also on the worksheet?
I can give you some hints on the one on the worksheet. So let's finish up this one real quick. Just make sure you distribute everything correctly. 9x plus 18 plus 24x equals 20x plus 8. Then you combine your like terms, and you can't see that again. Combine your like terms, get all the x's to one side, all the constants to the other. So that is our, I think that covers most everything from the worksheet. The one thing you want to be really careful about overall is making sure don't square anything until you have a square root alone. Don't square root until you have that square completely alone. So that's your biggest thing. So I'm going to set you guys to work on your worksheet, and then I'll go over that number 6 on the worksheet.